When is Project Feline coming out? A while ago I released a free prototype on itch, and it's playable, has all the mechanics, so all I have to do is just finish it, right? Well, itch is great and all, but it's a small pond. We all know that real gamers buy on Steam. I've got a store page up, which you can wishlist now, by the way, but if you go looking at the games on itch and the games on Steam, you'll notice a massive gap in quality, and that's because on Steam, the audience is bigger, the expectations are higher, and the competition is ruthless. In the last 3 years, over 41,000 games released on Steam, and less than half of them made over $500. With odds like that, you can't afford to be mediocre. You need to make something so exceptional that it dominates the competition. And Project Feline's last demo?
I mean, it's alright, like...
The game is fun, but it's still jank as hell, Gabi's animations are still jarring, the UI is super default, and the content is still lacking, and I'm gonna need a lot more than this to justify charging for this game. In fact, a lot of the game's problems rely on level design, which is not my strong suit. Every time I've tried making a level, it's never been good enough. There was always some issue with the layout being too boring, or the graphics not matching the style, and they would take so long to build. If I could only figure this out and come up with a new way to make better levels more quickly, I could make a new public demo, more representative of the final game and worthy to compete on Steam. And then I could make more content and finish the game. But that is a lot of work for one man. But Raymond, I hear you asking, why don't you just hire a team to help you with this stuff? Well, up until now I haven't been able to because it's really expensive, but with my remaining mega grant from Epic, I could hire a professional to handle the level stuff while I worked on everything else. With 2 devs instead of 1, we'd surely get through things a lot faster, and luckily I happened to know someone fit for the job, an Unreal Engine specialist who'd been making games for over 15 years. They had run their own studio, shipped commercial titles, and had the exact skills I needed to create a streamlined environment workflow. They mentored me through Unreal when I was starting out, and they were eager to contribute to the game, and I was eager to bring them aboard. When you've got someone wanting to work with you, it can be really tempting to get swept up in the excitement of it, to shake hands right away and hope for the best. But many teams underestimate the ambiguity that arises when working with other people. For instance, what work will you have them do exactly? And when is that work due? How much will they be paid? And through what means and how often will you correspond? To handle this ambiguity, work contracts are written to stipulate these things. Now I know what you're thinking, Ray, oh my god, this is such a waste of time. Can we just skip the paperwork and get straight into the work? And yes, it does take longer and it is more work to do things the right way by the book. But whenever I'm tempted to rush things, there's an old saying that comes to mind. Slow is smooth, and smooth is fast. I know, this seems contradictory at first, but it means that by slowing down and consistently getting the small things right, over the long term you'll achieve more in less time than those fraught with the consequences of rushing. So where do you get contracts from? Well, some people I've worked for in the past have just snagged free templates online and called it a day. But legally binding agreements are pretty serious and can wreak a lot of havoc. Believe me, I've seen enough bad contracts to know. I wasn't going to take my chances with some free template, so I learned to write my own. I had to write an NDA, a terms of engagement, and a creative brief. It's one thing to know what you want, but to communicate that with someone else requires you to be thorough. For an environment, you need to know what color palette you want, the level design you want, what textures you want, and how you want the lighting to look. This is difficult to put into words, so I sought the contractor's input on a lot of these things so we could reach a mutually agreed upon outcome. We broke down the work into deliverable milestones. I would pay in advance on each one, and the rest upon completion of that milestone. After the contracting phase, I then had to get them Project Feline's source files. We're both working remotely, and we'd need to make changes to the code simultaneously without overriding each other's work. This is where version control tools like SourceTree come into play, which I've been using this whole time, but at the recommendation of the contractor, we switched to Plastic SCM, which has much better merge tools and a better interface. It took me about a week to port all the source code over to Plastic and learn all the best practices, but now with the contract signed, the briefs written, the source control set up, we could finally get to work. Now, the progress I'm about to show you cost a lot of money, so we're launching new Project Feline merch. This is a fantastic way to support the game, the best way even, and you get something out of it. I've done a lot of illustrations of Gabi for this project, which I've now turned into stickers. So if there's a drawing of Gabi you really liked from one of my thumbnails or some of the concept art from the game, you can now own it for yourself. We've also got new apparel, homeware, and accessories with all new design. Check out the new collection at store.raymondcripps.com. The objective of the first brief was to develop a better 3D art workflow and better tools to build a new demo stage with both level design and art direction representative of the final game. Now, I don't have the money to retain a full-time level designer to do all of the game stages, so it was intended that after this contract had ended, I would go on to use these same tools to build the rest of the game alone. The milestones for this brief included a blocking pass where the stage layout is designed, an art test to get a sense of how the stage should look in a small area before building the full thing, and a final art pass where we apply this look to the rest of the layout. I had an idea of starting Gabi's adventure off by escaping from an underground genetics laboratory. She'd wake up in a cell and make her way through heavy doors, laser grids, pits, and enemy drones to escape to the surface. I didn't have time to draw concept art, but found some reference online for color schemes, textures, and decor. So that was the goal, but when working with another person, it becomes more than just working on the game, but also maintaining a good relationship. This was a challenge for me as a solo dev because I spend most of my time talking to a computer, which has no emotions and will just do what I tell it. But when working with another human, you have to be a bit more finessed and personable. I've been previously told I can be quite difficult, pedantic, and blunt, so for the sake of maintaining a positive culture, I decided to go against my natural temperament and take a very hands-off approach. I wasn't standing over their shoulder the whole time, and I didn't have time to. I had my hands full with my own work, so I allowed them to choose when to update me, and every few days they check in with me via Discord and screen share me their progress. They started by developing procedural tools to quickly generate large and varied geometry, as opposed to hand placing everything like I had done. A week later, they used these tools to complete a blockout for the stage, and they played through it for me through screen share. The layout flowed really well and featured many slopes and walls Gabi could exploit for momentum, and this was way more fun to watch than the previous demo level. So I approved it for the art pass and got back to work on my tasks. While the level design challenges were being taken care of, I worked to address the jank in Gabi's movement. I started by redesigning her pace-breaking melee combat and instead using a momentum-based aerial combat solution. You can watch my previous devlog where I go over that in detail. While I was redoing the combat, the contractor was working to improve the environment art workflow. Our goal was to establish what we called the anime gold standard, and create a small diorama that looked exactly the way we wanted before going on to mesh the entire stage. We previously utilized Unreal's PBR workflow to render the environments with rich texture detail and amazing lighting, much like the Makoto Shinkai films, but this left our results with that distinct default Unreal look, and to kill that look, we had to fake these effects ourselves. Now I know what you're thinking, anime uses cell shading, right? Well, why not just chuck a cell shader filter on the environment? And it's true that dynamic objects and characters in anime use 3-tone cell shading, however backdrops are illustrated with much more detail. So if these backdrops aren't cell shaded, then what gives them that anime wallpaper look? Through further study, I've learned that the key to faithfully achieving this style isn't with shading, but intentionality, making everything look like it was intended by the artist and preserving that intent through to the final result, and not letting a computer take those choices away. This can't be achieved with conventional means, so we had to get creative, starting with our materials. They first made a master material to be used on most of the stage. This material isn't too special. It's just a default material with all of the effects turned off, so no screen space reflections and no ambient occlusion. Next, they made a custom glass material. Anime glass has a distinct look, which we tried to emulate with this blue streak texture applied as a reflective cube map to the surface. But ironically, these reflections don't actually reflect anything, and I know Unreal can achieve more realistic reflections with RTX ray tracing, but this is how an artist would choose to draw reflections, and that's what's important. Next, they made a fog volume, allowing us to purposefully obscure parts of the environment, and they also made a custom God Ray object to give us greater control over the lighting. Unreal also has its own fog and light shafts, but these have a lot of volumetrics applied and they apply to the whole scene. By placing fog and light shafts manually, it gives us greater control and allows us to preserve the intent of the artist in the final result. So while it's very low-tech and less realistic and using really old techniques, it's exactly what I want. Using these materials, they constructed a single room of what would become the laboratory. I was really happy with the result, so I gave them the go-ahead to apply this meshing to the rest of the stage. While they were working on that, I began to address the next problem on the list, the lack of content. The new laboratory is the largest stage in the entire game, but it's also the shortest, clocking in at just 3 minutes to clear. Now those 3 minutes are way more exciting than the scrapped 15-minute demo, but I still worried players would complain about the game feeling too short. So I began developing a challenge framework that would allow me to create multiple challenges with varying objectives within the same stage, and rank players based on their performance. I believed having a variety of challenges like time attacks, collectathons, and a Flora's Lava mode would push players to be more creative and skillful with Gabi's movements, and that the rank system would reward this skillful play and add replay value. Also to keep in mind, creating just one stage had been really expensive. Implementing these systems would be a cost-effective way to keep players engaged while still keeping the stages short and the environment budget small. I've made a version of this system before for the prototype, but it was very buggy, rigid, and unreliable. This time, I didn't want to hard code these challenge types. I wanted a flexible, modular system that allowed me to author new challenge types and easily modify their parameters. I also didn't want players sitting through loading screens to switch challenges, and wanted a seamless way to load them in and out of the current environment. Now, on paper, this doesn't sound too complicated, but to make a robust system that will last till the end of development is a lot of work. I didn't want to spaghetti code a quick and easy solution that would temporarily solve the problem but break down later, especially for a system the entire game's content would rely on. So it took a few months of laborious work to design a framework that met those standards, and I'll admit it took way longer than I expected it would, but slow is smooth, and smooth is fast. I'll cover this system more in depth in a future devlog. While working on this, I received a call from the contractor reporting they had finished the laboratory. So I hopped in screen share where they walked me through the final result, and here it is. The stage starts in a cylindrical cell. Inside here, Gabi has a bed, a desk, and plenty of room to run around. Beyond the gate lies a series of narrow corridors that teach the player the basics of sliding, wall running, and combat. As she makes it further out of the lab, players encounter slopes which can be exploited for more momentum. But as she builds more speed, she's met with turrets, spinning blades, and lasers in increasing amounts, and rooms are filled with plasma to stop her from getting out. Watching them play through the finished stage, I knew instantly that going back to linear level design was the right move. And not only did the laboratory look stunning, but they had completed it ahead of schedule and asked if there was any more work they could help with. And lucky for them, there was. I really wanted to blow people's minds with this demo, but before players could even reach the content, they'd have to make it through this very underwhelming, low-effort main menu. As a gamer, I love it when a game could hype me up just with its title screen. I knew I had to get around to polishing this eventually, but I had my hands full with the mission system, so I delegated this to the contractor and designed a concept for the main menu that would utilize their skills. The brief I wrote described a 3D scene, rather than a static image, with Gabi standing in a boxcar looking out to a scrolling cityscape. I sent them the brief, and 3 days later they returned with the finished scene. I hopped on screen share and beheld this gorgeous menu screen. To build the cityscape, they created a blueprint to procedurally generate buildings and foliage. This might seem a bit overkill for a main menu, but these same tools could be utilized for future stages to save development time. The boxcar itself was kitted out with lots of detail from my initial concept. When clicking the level select button, the camera pans left to a high-tech computer terminal, and when clicking the extras button, the camera pans right to a pair of bunks. The corners of the hideout are also littered with little decorations to give it personality, like posters, plants, and a stalling vending machine. Now, you're probably wondering, much like I was, how were they able to get all of this inside a moving boxcar? Well, they didn't move the boxcar. Instead, they made the procedurally generated models in the background scroll sideways across the map to simulate motion. This was also completed ahead of schedule, and I was really happy with the result. I have to say, at this point, I was really impressed at the speed at which they were able to get through these deliverables, and they were eager to help with more, so I obliged and gave them something a bit more challenging. In a previous devlog where I scrapped our semi-open world maps and narrowed my focus on linear stages, many of you suggested it would be cool to reuse these scrap stages as hub worlds between the main content. I dismissed this idea at first, and the level design for these is pretty bad anyway. However, the new procedural tools and challenge system being developed would make the creation of new hub worlds a lot more achievable. I figured we could build the environment in no time, and I could make all sorts of side missions to put in there. So I hopped on a call with the contractor where we discussed this idea, and they were really on board and had lots of ideas to flesh out the world. Together, we wrote up a new brief to use these new procedural tools to build a hub world. This new map was based on the previously scrapped port level made for the Screen Australia demo. I wanted to reuse the visual theme of the port as inspiration. I also searched up real-world reference of architecture built from repurposed shipping crates, and I even went outside and took my own photos of a real port. I also drew a top-down sketch to establish the general layout and scale. The port was split up up into 5 areas: the promenade, apartments, market, ports, and warehouse. After some more back and forth ideating, we finalized the brief, they got to work on the port, and I got back to work on the challenge system. The development of this environment was much like the laboratory, with a look dev, blocking, meshing, and polish pass. They had to spend some time further developing the procedural tools before meshing could begin, but as these could also be used for the main stages later, it seemed worthwhile. They had also undertaken to make custom building models specifically for Gabi's movement. They checked in with me every few days to show me their progress, and it was so exciting to see this world I'd imagined in my head for so long come to life before my eyes. During these check-ins, we also brainstormed ways to improve the level art. The port was shaping up to be very urban and industrial, and we thought it would be really cool if there were advertisements and billboards for in-universe brands, like in the Ratchet and Clank games. I have some experience with visual branding, so I paused my work for a day to design custom signage for them to use on these buildings. By the time it was finished, we were still a week ahead of schedule, and they had time for one more task. Navigating the hub world felt amazing, but it was lacking one thing that would give it even more life: crowds of NPCs. I had planned to add these to the hub later, but the contractor assured me they could do it by the end of the week. They suggested using an anime character generator called Vroid Studio to rapidly pump out NPC designs. Under this system, hairstyles, body types, and articles of clothing could be quickly designed and exported as interchangeable presets to be randomly assigned at runtime. This would be much faster than designing each NPC by hand, and it seemed like a great idea, so I drafted one final brief and let them work their magic. While they were off doing that, I had one final problem to address for the demo. I wanted to implement some kind of dialogue system to introduce a way to tell a story in the game and to diegetically present side challenges. Just imagine, instead of picking challenges from a menu, Gabi could instead talk to NPCs in the hub world to enter side missions. I've given a great deal of effort and thought into the characters and story I want to have in this game, and you can watch my previous devlog if you want to hear my thoughts on that in detail. As for the dialogue system, I wanted to implement a text-based system like in the games from the N64 because it's much cheaper, faster, and easier to iterate and localize compared to the more costly alternatives like voice acting. I've seen plenty of games with similar dialogue to this and wondered if there was an existing tool that offered these features to save me having to do one from scratch, and luckily Groguru's Blueprint dialogue system met all of my requirements. I did need to do a bit of setup on my end and had to design my own UI widgets, but once I did that, I set up a small demonstration in my test sandbox level to give Calder the ability to give Gabi missions through in-game dialogue. And just like that, Project Feline now has a proper dialogue system. At the end of the week, I checked in with the contractor who had finished implementing the NPCs. Through screen share, they showed me the system in action, and it was breathtaking to see crowds of people walking around in Gabi's world. I'll admit I was skeptical at first whether they'd be able to complete such a complex system in such a short amount of time, but sure enough, here it was. Over these 9 months of development, I felt a sense of camaraderie. It was nice knowing that even when I got stuck on my work, progress was still being made. But unfortunately, my budget is very limited and I couldn't afford to keep them on forever. So by April, our final contract was up and we parted ways. It was still a while before I could implement all this progress into the game, because when you're using source control, when one person's working on one thing and one person's working on the other, you gotta eventually merge it into the main branch, and that can get kind of messy. I just wanted to get my stuff done first. But when I got around to finally merging everything, I started to notice some problems. So when you try to merge something, it'll give you a list of all the files that you're going to be merging over. As I was looking through this big list, I started to notice just about every file had not been named properly. When you're working on a project, it's good to have a consistent naming convention. You don't want to be going in, naming your files final.jpg and stuff like that. And before contracting began, I actually provided the contractor with a document of a naming and file management convention guideline, and that's what I've been sticking to for years. But as I was scrolling through, I was noticing that this naming convention guideline wasn't being observed. And I know this doesn't sound like a huge deal. Most people don't notice this sort of thing, but to me, that is very worrying. I'm a firm believer that how you do the small things is how you do everything. And as I was seeing this, I just had this gut feeling that told me if they couldn't even do this bit, then what else would I be in for once I merged everything? Maybe I'm overreacting, right? Maybe it's no big deal. Maybe it's all fine. So I tried merging everything anyway. And then when I opened the project up, everything I had feared the most came true. I started looking into how the tools had been made and how the models had been made. The idea for these was that I would go on to use these tools for the rest of the game. And if I'm going to be using these tools, I want to understand how they work. I want to use them the way they were intended. As I started opening these up, it was a complete spaghetti monster, and I did not understand how these tools worked. A custom spline tool was used to create a lot of the geometry in the lab and the sidewalks in the hub world, and while they may look different in each stage, they do the same thing, just with cosmetic differences. Because Unreal is an object-oriented engine, it's very easy to create as many deviations, or child classes, as I need. And because these child classes all inherit their basic functions from the parent class, I can easily fix bugs or add new functionality to the parent, where it will automatically propagate to all the child classes. But that's not how this had been built. Instead, the contractor had made an entirely different spline class for each level. And I opened each one of them up, and the code was practically identical. So if there's an issue with one of these, or if I want to add new functionality to the splines, I would have to go and do that for as many different levels there are in the game. And it's very wasteful to essentially have the same code copy-pasted for what could be dozens of times. There was indeed a bug I found with these where the materials wouldn't apply correctly. So I've had to fix that bug once for the lab spline tool and again for the port spline tool. It might not seem like a huge deal, but it means in the future that a lot of things that would be small fixes turn into much bigger hassles the bigger the project gets. The way the lab was constructed also raised some questions. Instead of using a BSP workflow, the entire stage was constructed using static mesh tiles. Unreal uses instancing to optimize how duplicate meshes are rendered, so it can handle this just fine, but each tile contains superfluous edges and back-facing polygons. They seem innocuous on an individual tile, but the extra polygons add up when placing hundreds or thousands of them in a single scene, consuming precious memory. Furthermore, because the lighting and collision is processed individually per tile, this creates visible seams in the lighting and collision problems. Being trained in parkour and acrobatics, Gabi is quite sensitive to collision. The slightest hitch can kill her momentum or send her flying off walls. It just struck me as so strange that they had chosen to do this way. Maybe there was some issue with the merge conflict or something. Maybe there was just something I didn't understand about all of these tools. Maybe it was designed this way for a reason. So I tried to get back in touch with them. I asked them about the spline tools being all separate classes. However, their response to my question was not sure, was ages ago. And then they left the server and stopped responding to my emails. And then as I kept digging more into the classes, I noticed there is a function in here that does something. I don't know what it does, because the function is unnamed. There is an output node at the end with a boolean that isn't named, that isn't connected to anything. So for some reason, this function is outputting an unnamed boolean that will always return false. And then I kept going deeper. They had not just done programming, they had also done some 3D modeling work. However, when I went and started to look at the source files for these custom buildings that we had used to construct the hub world, I noticed that all of the windows were slightly crooked, the textures were all stretched. In 3D modeling, there is a rule where you don't want to have n-gons, which are 5 or more sided polygons. Every face should either be a triangle or a quad. And there's a reason why that rule exists, because if you go over that and start doing n-gons and 5-sided polygons, it really encumbers the workflow when doing any kind of edge selection. It also subdivides poorly. The computer, when it ports it to Unreal, has to subdivide that into triangles. But if you give it a model that doesn't subdivide cleanly, then that can cause problems. I kid you not, on one of these buildings, for one of the walls, there was an n-gon that wasn't 5 sides, not 6 sides, not 7 sides, not 8 sides, but 16 sides on these buildings that are being put all over this environment. And as I kept going even further, I started noticing another weird problem. So I hadn't yet actually played all of these new changes for myself. I had just been watching them show me through screen share because, you know, we're based in Australia, the internet here is terrible. I just trusted that whatever they were showing me was what I would be seeing. But when I ran this for myself, I noticed that when I loaded into the hub world with all the NPCs, firstly, the proportions for these NPCs was really strange. You know, a lot of them had arms that were way too short or clothes that didn't quite fit right. The NPCs themselves, when running the game, brought the frame rate of the game down from what was 140 frames per second on my machine to 20 frames a second on my machine. That's no good. That's literally unplayable. Now, there might be a reason for this. You know, when you run an Unreal game in the Unreal editor, the performance you get there isn't necessarily indicative of what the actual performance will be when you compile the game. So I tried to package the game, but it logged a bunch of errors and just wouldn't package. It wasn't until I took this map out of the game and deleted all the associated files that I was able to get this to work. Because it was so disorganized, I couldn't narrow it down. I had no idea what it was. Alright, so I was just recording some B-roll to show you the file structure of the NPCs, but it's so bad I can't even find where it is. I mean, you look at these, where do you think it would be? Let's see, NPCs. Characters? Oh. Are they in the core characters? No. Oh, okay. No, not an AI. I don't know, are they in the art folder? Let's search NPC. Okay, so here are the assets. Where is this? Oh, Feline Art Tech Art. NPC Systems. Okay, so they're nested it all the way in this folder. Here's the folder I was going to show. So we've got the blueprint, we've got the animation, some materials. What's in all of these? Let's have a look. Male head only, outdated 2. What? Okay, that is a lot of folders. Like, let's have a look at our tree here. To get to NPC assets at all, we got to dig all the way into art, tech art, NPC systems. Then if you want to get to any of the little textures, you got to then dig through more folders. And we don't have not just one outdated, but 2 outdated folders. Oh, and all of these are problems because of a thing in game development and software development called technical debt, or tech debt. Now, tech debt is the cost of future reworking when choosing a fast yet limited solution rather than a better solution that takes longer. When you do things really quickly and you spaghetti code something together, that is more stuff you're going to have to fix later. You accrue more and more tech debt.
Hey, Ernie? Hey, Ernie, the window's open.
Yeah, I know, Bert.
But, Ernie, see, the rain is coming in and it's getting everything wet here.
Yeah.
Why don't you just close the window?
Oh, I can't, Bert. You see, the window is stuck.
Fix it!
Oh, I can't do that, Bert.
Why?
Because it's raining outside, Bert.
I think the rain has stopped now. Isn't this a good time to fix the old window there?
Well, why fix it now, Bert? If it's not raining anymore, nothing's getting wet, so there's no reason to fix it now, Bert.
I'm not a professional programmer, I'm all self-taught, but I've had my own issues with my own tech debt early in development, and I've had to refactor my own system several times. And is my code perfect? No, there's probably heaps of ways to improve it, but whenever I make any system, I pay attention and do the best I can. I don't want it done perfectly, but I want it done carefully. And that doesn't mean avoiding tech debt at all costs. It can be beneficial and well managed if taken on deliberately. Where I take issue is when it is forced on me through carelessness. And this whole thing reminded me a lot of this old Zen story. And it goes like this. A monk told Joshu, "I have just entered the monastery. Please teach me." Joshu asked, "Have you eaten your rice porridge?" The monk replied, "I have eaten." Joshu said, "Then you'd better wash your bowl." At that moment, the monk was enlightened. I've come to take that to mean it's not just about neatness, it's about mindfulness. It's about fully completing a task, paying attention, and forming habits to be present. How you do the small things is how you do everything. For the monk to have the discipline, like they become enlightened when they are focused on what they're doing and fully complete the task. They don't leave it unfinished. For someone that isn't going to wash their bowl, that isn't going to code comment their stuff, that isn't going to organize their files properly, it's a symptom of someone who is undisciplined and unmindful. If you're able to do something as simple as washing a bowl and you can do that on autopilot, then you're much better equipped to handle bigger challenges because your mind is not going to be surrounded by dirty rice bowls everywhere. And I know this sounds pedantic, but if it wasn't important, then people wouldn't bother writing standards for this stuff. In the game dev YouTube scene that I'm in, I don't see this topic talked about a lot because YouTube incentivizes making Minecraft in one day type stuff. And it's very sensational, it makes it look very quick and easy, but in a lot of these cases they're cutting corners and doing things that are bad practice to get that video out more quickly. Another popular genre on YouTube is to do game jams, and while well-intentioned, I feel these environments create misaligned incentives, where instead of being punished for bad practice, you're rewarded with short-term novelty and validation. I've personally spent many years on YouTube and in game jams, and I feel these environments didn't aptly prepare me for the kinds of projects I wanted to build. Due to the artificially condensed timeframes, critical things like technical debt aren't allowed to exist because by the time it would accrue, you've already moved on to the next project. It's not to say these environments don't have a place, but I don't feel they reward the work ethic conducive to shipping an exceptional game. Now with technical debt, it's very insidious because it's invisible to the players, and the common argument I see against it is that, I can code this bad because the players won't see it. The players aren't going to be able to know, except they will. Players can tell when something is badly made. They won't see the files or the code, but the habitual lack of care in the small things compounds to lack of care in the big things, tainting the entire experience in this aura of apathy, which players will notice. But the demands of the market make it tempting to rush. Whenever a game appears to be taking too long to come out, it's widely believed that just hiring more developers and more engineers will speed things up. And when I tried this, progress skyrocketed at first. But I found that adding more humans adds more opportunity for human error. And over the long term, without consistent discipline, care, and attention to detail from everyone on the team, the only thing that speeds up is the rate at which more technical debt is accumulated. If left unchecked, the interest becomes insurmountable, further bloating the workload, increasing expenditure, and killing the momentum needed to finish the game. As a gamer, I've observed enough disappointing launches to know that no matter the team size, those who allow their standards to slip too far may never repay this interest, but they still pay a price, making their short-term deadlines but losing the long-term trust of the gamer. And that is precisely what I'm trying to avoid.
All right, we're gonna scour every vat, every tank, every cooked surface. And then we're gonna clean up every possible source of contamination. And only then, we cook.
So after I found all of the merge conflicts and the files and everything, I spent 2 weeks just cleaning up the files, not even the code, because I couldn't do anything else until that was sorted. The game wouldn't compile with the hub world in it, so that had to go. That's in the bin. And a lot of the tools for the laboratory and everything, because of the way it's been built, a lot of it's going to have to get redone. But this was partly my fault as well, because I really should have been checking this stuff way before the contract had ended, which I failed to do. I didn't do that because I didn't think I would need to. I didn't think I'd be having to tell someone with 15 years experience how to name files or how to leave code comments. And I was wrong. I was wrong to assume that. I shouldn't have assumed that, but I did. And that cost me a lot. So I'm not going to be making that mistake again. When I started developing Project Feline, it was a casual side project. I had no long-term plan for it, no skills to make a video game, and no money to hire a team. So I taught myself as I went, while documenting my journey for the world to see. And the world took a bigger interest in it than I ever expected, motivating me to work even harder to take this from a dream game to a real game. But the world has often told me I would fail trying to do this myself, that I'd need to network, build relationships, chase government grants, and assemble a team to make the game successful. Over the last several devlogs, I've tried following this advice, applying for the Screen Australia grant, which didn't work out, and hiring contractors to help with development, which didn't work out. I've learned a lot from these failures, but following this advice hasn't brought the game any closer to being done. And worst of all, I had a gut feeling this would happen. I knew this advice wouldn't work, but I didn't want to be right. I wanted to involve other people, because after getting told enough times you can't do it yourself, you start to lose confidence that you can, allowing self-doubt to take hold. But you know what? I'd rather have no team than one that doesn't care about the player experience, who doesn't wash the bowl or take pride in their craft. Players can pick up on these things, and they deserve more than the bare minimum. So since then, I've taken that doubt, I ate it up and spit it out, and did it my way. They say you need a team, but I say if you want it done right, you've got to do it yourself. So I shouldered the responsibility and fully committed to becoming a better and more effective solo dev with full confidence in my abilities. To do that, like the enlightened monk, you have to be mindful and focus on the small things and wash the bowl. It's required a lot of discipline and self-control, and while I may not have the same man hours as a 20-person team, I've learned to seek more out of the hours I have, rather than trying to get more hours. Expunging all this tech debt hasn't been easy, so I've been developing my own workflow to rebuild these levels myself, but the development I'm most proud of is Gabi's final model. People weren't shy to point out the issues with the old one, so I rebuilt her from scratch, demonstrating what's possible when you focus on the small things and get those right. I've meticulously crafted her this way as a testament to that spirit, but that's a long story that'll have to wait for next time. So that was the story so far of what's happened trying to get this demo out. As it would turn out, some things do not get done faster when you just hire more people. And for those that were really looking forward to this demo, I'm sorry that that you've had to wait. I was looking forward to having it ready too, but considering everything that's transpired in this devlog, it's going to need a bit more time to cook. But since all that's happened, I've discovered new techniques that will allow me to quickly fix this level, as well as continue making new levels for the rest of the game without needing to outsource. So that's pretty exciting, and I look forward to sharing all of that with you in due time. But first, we've got some other stuff to get through. We got Gabi's new model, we got the mission system, and we got more level design coming up. So if you don't want to miss the next development in Project Feline, make sure you're subscribed. And if you want to directly support the development of Project Feline, check out the new merch drop with some all new designs ready to go. My favorite design is the wash your bowl design, because, you know, I take pride in the small things. I think washing the bowl is important. And Gabi thinks washing the bowl is important too. And if you think washing the bowl is important, I think this design would look really good on you. And I want to give a huge thank you to all the channel members and patrons for supporting my channel and making these videos possible. Become a supporter and receive behind the scenes updates, access to my private Discord, your name in the devlog credits, and supporters on Patreon receive exclusive merch designs. I'd wager stories like this happen all the time to game developers, but because most of them aren't on YouTube, you never hear about them. So if you're an aspiring developer and you're considering rounding a group together and tackling a project like this, I hope this devlog gives you some insight as to what you might be in for if you're not careful. And for all my felines out there, I just want to give you a huge thank you for being so patient and sticking with me on this journey. You know, I was honestly considering quitting the project after everything that happened, but because I know so many of you want to see this game, it motivates me to continue pushing through the hard times to make something great, and I couldn't have done it without your encouragement and support. That patience doesn't go unnoticed, and I really do appreciate it. Speaking of patience, I hope you won't have to wait too long for the next devlog, so I'll get to work on that and I'll see you then.